So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. We are so lucky to have Vertical with us today. I wanted to make sure that, again, I say that your microphone's muted. I'll be monitoring the chat. So don't hesitate to put questions in there as you see fit, and we will get to them. I promise. That's a big promise, though, isn't it? Again, we are so lucky to be here. Thank you for coming to our AGCCP webinar. It is featuring Vertical, and we're so lucky to have Jeremy Markey presenting to us. It's the tale of two trash cans. Are our human systems trashing our agency experience? Jeremy's a seasoned leader in workforce experience, project management, leadership development, and customer support. Now, he's successfully reorganized corporate KPIs, or key performance indicators, and leadership systems for a wide range of organizations, both small and large. Now, today he's here to share his insights on systems theory and its impact on contact centers in this webinar. Again, the tale of two trash cans are our human systems trashing our agent experience. So again, Jeremy, I'm going to put the floor to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Jody. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I want to start by trying to make you a little hungry, if that's all right. These are both Colorado companies, Chipotle and Qdoba. I love them both. Typically for me, deciding factor on which one I want to go to has to do with if I'm feeling like queso or not. But the other deciding factor is my wife with me? Because when I leave Chipotle, if my wife's with me, I either leave embarrassed or worse, I leave in trouble. And the reason for that is Chipotle has these big baskets with these signs that says, please don't discard plastic baskets. I guess I'm not good at reading. I fail. I fail almost every time. And I'm either expected to reach in the trash can and pull it out by my loving wife, which is embarrassing, or I refuse, and that works out less well for me. But at Qdoba, I don't have that problem. And the reason is, while Chipotle has this sign that says, please don't discard the plastic baskets, Qdoba, on the other side, has a hole that's too small to fit the basket in. So there's no chance for me to do it. And the difference between these two systems, Chipotle's system is referred to as a signifier. They've got something that signifies what you're supposed to do. Qdoba uses a system called pokioki, which is a Japanese phrase that means result not possible or invalid result. Two very different ways to approach the same problem, one of which gets me in trouble, the other one doesn't. And I start with this example because I think it's important to recognize that when we set up a human system, just because it works for us, just because we think it will work, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get the results we want. And the purpose of a human system is to get the results we want the majority of the time with as little, if not no effort as possible. So to help with that, today we're going to talk through a couple of things. All of these are just to introduce you to the subject. Contact centers are historically very good with hiring good people, training supervisors, training leadership, training CSRs. They're typically very good at understanding computer systems and what the customer wants. Where we tend to fail is at systems theory or human systems. That's the area where I think contact centers right now need the biggest help. So I'm going to touch on a very quick theory of systems overview, handful of sentences, they'll be very light, what those leadership stages are to help you identify where am I with this human system? Am I in a place where it's really healthy or am I not, based on a couple pretty easy identifiers? And then if it's not in a healthy place, we'll go through what are some common system failures and some typical ways to help solve the system failures. And then we'll give you a handful of examples, just a few, that more times than not work for contact centers and solving those problems, so we can get you started. And then when we get to questions and answers, I'll touch on some resources. So if you really like this and you want to go from, hey, that's a neat idea, so I want to try some of this, there's some resources to help you get started. Then we'll do some questions and answers. And feel free to stop me, ping us, whatever throughout as well. If I'm touching on something that you want to dig further in, just yell and I'll stop. So systems theory. The easiest way to identify if it's a system or not is ask yourself one question. If you get the results from the majority of the people, the majority of the time, it's not the people, it's the system. Bottom line. So if we, the bulk of the agents on our team, the bulk of the agents in the contact center, the bulk of the supervisors, if they're doing that most of the time, instead of holding individuals accountable or having critical conversations, the answer is, okay, what in the system is causing it? What is encouraging that behavior? Why is that the behavior in the path of least resistance? If we find, on the other hand, that it's an outlier, there's a handful of folks, that's a place for critical conversation, coaching, feedback, accountability, and so forth. I want to hesitate here for a second because what I find when I go to various contact centers, a lot of human systems are put in place to help leadership avoid having a critical conversation. And that's a bad system. Those are the type of systems that tend to lead to poor outcomes, which is one of the first things we'll talk on when we get to common system failures, because building a system that keeps us from having to have a critical conversation, it just doesn't work. So again, easiest way to know if it's system, if it's the majority of the people are doing it the majority of the time, let's go dig into the system. If that's not the case, then let's go work on individuals. So healthy stages. A strong system has the ability to absorb shocks and stay functional. And a great system is anti-fragile. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what that means. Let's use an analogy of a candle. A candle is fragile to the wind, meaning the wind will blow a candle out. Now you can make a candle more durable by putting it in an enclosure, making it a better candle, maybe blocking the wind. So things you can do to make it more durable, but that's just a different stage of fragile. Either way, it's just how much wind is it going to take to blow it out. Anti-fragile is where it would get strength from the wind. An example of that would be a forest fire. Forest fire doesn't get blown out by the wind. It is strengthened by the wind. So when we build a system, oftentimes systems are built to be more durable, which is just another layer of fragile. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but if we can build a system to gain strength from the thing that was weakening the system before, that's the money. That's where you want to be. And that's where our jobs become easier and we're able to get more done in less time. So what does that look like for us? So when we join a new team, a new department, take over a role, sometimes when we stand up a new process, we're in the dependent phase. So this is a picture here. We're in the middle. That's our happy, smiling yellow face. And then our team surrounds us. And in this dependent phase, everything is reliant on us. If we step out, we take a day off, things fall apart. We're not available, we're in a meeting, things fall apart. That's a difficult place. And if you've never been in this phase before, please do a webinar and teach us how. The rest of us have all been there, and maybe some of us are there today with certain processes. But if we're in the dependent phase, it can be bad leadership, but oftentimes there's something, we're either new to the role, but if we are still in this after a few months or so, chances are the problem isn't that we're new to the role or we're still learning. Chances are there's something wrong with the system. And an analogy for this is like ice skating uphill, where you feel like as long as I keep pushing, as long as I keep skating, I'm making progress. But as soon as I stop, I slide back to the bottom. And that's an exhausting phase. So if we're in the dependent phase and we're not new at the role or new in the position, or it's not a new process, that's a sign that there's probably something wrong with the system. Now, what a lot of folks do is they'll make it to the interdependent phase where we make the team better by being there, but if we're gone, it'll still go down the road. And a lot of folks stop here. So this is when the system is good enough. We're no longer new anymore. And we still have to manage it. We still have to maintain it. We still have to pay attention. We still have to dig in regularly to keep it on track. But it no longer feels like you're trying to skate uphill. It no longer feels like I can't take a day off. And most folks stop here because they think they've reached on high. They're in a great place, but there is a better place than this. That better place is getting to the advisory step. The advisory step is actually when, if we get hands-on and get involved, we actually slow things down. The system works so well, it's almost like ice skating downhill. And this is where we want to get to. So when it comes to, do I need to check on the system? The first step is, am I getting the result from the majority of the people the majority of the time? If the answer is yes, you know it's a system. The second piece is, where am I Am I in a dependent phase? Am I in an interdependent phase? Or am I in an advisory phase? If you're in an advisory place and you're getting the results you want, keep going, right? Sky's the limit. If you're in dependent or independent phase, then you're going to want to ask these next set of questions to help you see what is going on with that system. So there's a lot of things that cause system failure. These are the 4 most common. These are not the only ones. We don't have time to go through all of them. We're not teaching, a 12-week college course. So we're just going to touch on these fairly lightly, but it's purpose misalignment. There's system drift. There's feedback stability and overfitting. Am I hearing a question? I thought I heard a voice.
You'll be upset, so chill.
Nope, I think it's somebody off of mute. That's all right. So purpose misalignment, system drift, feedback stability issues, and overfitting. These are the most common problems we see in contact centers for system not to work. I'm going to talk through how do you know that you have that one and what is a common path forward. So the first one is purpose misalignment. In systems consistently produce results that are contrary to its intended purpose or goals. Behaviors don't align with the system needs or what we're trying to achieve. Purpose misalignment most frequently comes along when we do what we talked about a little bit earlier, where we stand up a system to avoid a critical conversation because it's not actually necessary. If we've got 1 or 2 people who are bad apples, it's okay. Let's let them go. When I'm teaching leadership courses, I tend to tell people I'm here to help you out or I'm here to help you out. The person gets to pick, right? So if they're a bad apple, it's not about building a system so they will no longer be a bad apple. It's we made a bad hire. Let's let them go or coach them, whatever you need to do, and then move on. So purpose misalignment is we've built this system to get result A, but right away it's not getting that. It's getting result B and it doesn't seem to be working. And when we have that where it's getting a very different result than what's intended, the best solution is typically to start over. Don't try to fix, don't try to solve, don't try to tune it or make it better. If it's that misaligned, we missed the mark, we did something wrong. Let's go back to a previous state and reevaluate where we're at. The second area is system drift. System drift is where it was working and now it no longer is. This is where we have an issue that the folks were doing a fine job. We set it up, had this expectation, we're looking for them to provide this result, whether it's quality or adherence or sales or whatever that is, collections, whatever that is, we set that up. And over time, they start drifting away from that expectation. And a way to think of system drift is, think about if you were taking a boat from New York and you were headed to London. If you're off by 2 or 3%, you end up in Africa and completely miss the whole of Europe. That's system drift. It's where when we set something up, we weren't 100% calibrated. It wasn't perfectly right. And because we haven't had touch points or feedback in between and recalibrations as we get down the path, we've just slowly drifted apart from what the intended goal is and what the people are doing. And the easiest solution if we have system drift is increase the frequency of that feedback cycle. Touch base more, do more observations, check with them, and provide more coachings and more feedback. A lot of contact centers aren't so great at doing regular one-on-ones and doing them correctly. If we do them correctly, we can typically combat system drift if we have a good system. This is typically just, I need to give them more insight into where they are and how they're doing, and system drift tends to solve itself. And that's an easy fix. The next is feedback and stability issues. This is where we're trying to treat the issue like system drift because we were initially getting what we wanted and they fell away. But when we try to push them back into place, instead of them snapping back in and getting the results we want, there's either resistance or there's overcorrection. And now they're going too far in the other direction and performance is not where we want it to be. When we have this type of problem, it's typically a case of we didn't do camel building, instead we did horse building. So there's a book called Winning Ways, and very briefly they talk about when we build a process, if we build that process with people, they're more likely to contribute and own it and be a part of that system versus if we enforce a system on people, they're more likely not to get it, not to understand, and to fight against it. And that's when we have those feedback and stability issues. So if we do, that one is also not that difficult to solve. We don't have to scrap the whole thing. It's take a step back, spend some time with those folks who are asked to do it, build it in a more robust way using their feedback, and just tweak it enough to include their feedback to the point where they feel like they've got that buy-in. And then Tiana and I see that dependent phase. We're going to help you. The feedback and stability issues will then start to resolve once they feel like they've got that buy-in and they're part of it. The last most common issue that we run into is overfit. Overfit is we're looking for this result, and while the people's performance and what they're doing hasn't changed, the environment is changing, and they're not adapting to the environment. Where what the requirements are different, the customer is changing their behaviors, the system is starting to change a little bit, whatever that is, but their behaviors stay the same, and they're going in the same direction. They're not moving with it. That is a scenario where whatever systems that we've built, we're overfit for a past state. They're no longer good for the existing phase that we're in, and we need to go back and redo that. And typically the answer to prevent overfitting is to allow for more play in the system, to allow for more humans to make more choices. Don't make the system as strict or as stringent as we did last time, to give people room to flex and to move and make judgment calls. When we take judgment away, and to be fair, some environments are so heavily regulated by the government or other regulation entities, we can't really get away from overfitting, and that's a difficult scenario to be in. But if we can get away from overfitting, give them that flexibility. Some of the longest lasting companies on the planet are either bars, restaurants, or hotels. And the reason why they're the longest lasting is not necessarily because they're the oldest, it's because those systems, you cannot take all the slack out of the system. Because of the way they work, because of the way food works and the way serving people works, you just cannot take the slack out of the system. So there's always slack. So when things go wrong, there's room to correct and room to alter. If we think back to the pandemic, when we had just-in-time delivery, there was no room for slack in that system. As soon as there was a small hiccup, everything fell apart. So when you're thinking about overfitting, if we have a scenario where everybody's still moving in the same direction, but the systems are changing, they're not changing with it, alter that system to give them that flexibility so they can move as the system moves and stay aligned. That's a very high view of things on how to figure out what system is broken. So I'm going to touch on those again. If we have purpose misalignment, where what we've rolled out is not getting the results we want at all and is getting very contrary results, it's time to go back to previous state and rethink what we're doing. If we have system drift, where the folks are just drifting away from the system, we probably just need to increase feedback, increase transparency and visibility to where they're at so they can judge for themselves how they're doing. We've got feedback and stability issues. It's probably a buy-in issue or a culture issue where the folks are just resistant to it or just don't understand and are overcorrecting because they don't get it. Typically, that's a solution there is to help people understand, get people involved in improving the system so they have ownership and it's their system and not our system. And last one is overfitting, where we've built such a rigid system that folks cannot adapt to the new environment as the environment's changing. And we need to put a little more slack in there, put more humanity into it, and give them more space. That's a lot on systems before I start talking about some specific examples. It's quite high level. I want to hesitate here and see if anybody has any thoughts, questions, or what ifs before I move on to examples.
I have a what if.
Please.
Is it probable or plausible that all of these things could be an issue at different phases of like a project or an implementation, or with like you said, different staff changes? Like, is it possible for all of these things to exist in one environment at one time?
Yes, and good luck. Yes.
Thank you.
They
Thank
all
you.
can happen. They can happen to the same process, or they can happen to different processes impacting the same people. And when that happens, my tendency is I like to get momentum. And the easiest way to get momentum is start with low-hanging fruit. What are the things that we think we can solve and get people moving in that right direction fairly easily and then build to those bigger and bigger things. And the only caveat is if we've got a system that's going to cause a critical failure. You know, it's going to cause our company to be insolvent. It's going to cause us to have to shut down the contact center or what have you. Okay, do those first. But otherwise, start with low-hanging fruit, get momentum, get people on your side, build some early wins, and that momentum will help you tackle those harder and harder ones that are misaligned later on. Does that help a little bit, Tiana? Thumbs up, I'll take that thumbs up. Other thoughts or questions on these? And I recognize as supervisors, it can seem like, well, I'm just doing what my boss tells me. I don't really have any influence. I'll show you that with the systems that we have coming, some of you have a lot of direct control over, and some of them, you're right, it is something that you've got an influence for, but I think it's worth influencing. So the 4 systems I'm going to go through that work most of the time in most contact centers to solve a lot of problems is first, relationship building one-on-ones. I like that, Timothy. You're absolutely right. Tree that bends versus tree that snaps. You're absolutely right. So relationship building one-on-ones aren't the same as most one-on-ones. There is a way of doing it the right way that builds that momentum and gets people moving in the right direction. Compelling scorecards. Oftentimes contact centers either have no scorecard at all or they have way too much, and we'll go through that. The next one is availability versus adherence. This is where people typically light the torches and sharpen the pitchforks. I'm okay if that's what happens when we talk about the difference between availability and adherence and why I think availability is the right answer. And the last one is VOC embedded QA. And I find in most contact centers, just these 4 things solves 80% of the problems that contact centers have and are able to move forward without getting too deep into the rest of systems theory. So first, relationship building one-on-ones. When I go to contact centers, what I typically find is one-on-ones are either they're done when I need to tell you something. You've done something bad. Let's have a one-on-one. Okay, that's bad. Or it's a supervisor has this inventory of things that I need to get out of my mouth so I can say them to you. Whether it's here's your scores or here's the changes that are happening or whatever that is, and we are just verbal vomiting all over them. Or it's not regularly scheduled and in the right place. There's a lot of things that can cause relationship building one-on-ones to break. And sometimes a good litmus test on if you've got a good relationship building one-on-one status is, do you know the names of your employees' spouses? Do you know their kids' names if they have them or pets' names if they have them? If the answer is maybe or not at all, it's probably a good time to go back to our one-on-one process. And what is a healthy one-on-one? What is a healthy relationship building one-on-one? Step 1 is it has to be consistently scheduled. Has to be number 1 on the calendar, and it has to be the last thing off the calendar. Preferably at the same time. I know calendars are weird, so sometimes you got to play calendar soup and kind of mix it around. I totally get it. But you want to try to stay as consistent as you can. If they're on vacation or you're on vacation, you don't have the one-on-one. But otherwise, have it at the same time. If we've got a complicated environment where there's a lot of things that the CSRs are asked to do that are very varied, or the agents are asked to do that's varied, you typically want that one-on-one to be closer to a half an hour, especially if it's like a technical group, like technical support or something like that. You probably need it closer to half an hour. If it's something that's fairly routine type work that they're doing, you can typically go closer to 20 minutes, less than 20 minutes. We tend to find that's not optimal. And when I say consistently scheduled, I mean every week. Every other week does get good results. It's not as good as every week, but if we do it less than once a week, the data tells us that, or less than every other week, the data tells us that we probably shouldn't do them at all because we're actually just adding work to us instead of improving the environment, which is the purpose of this. Second, it needs to be in a private setting. You know, now a lot of folks are working from home, so private setting is kind of a default. But in the office, it has to be a private setting. Having one-on-ones in an agent's cubicle, big no-no. Also, doing in our office is a big no-no. It's our space. They're not going to feel terribly comfortable in there. And you know, a lot of folks say, well, my CSRs or my agents are afraid of my office. Well, spoiler alert, if they're afraid of your office, they're actually not afraid of your office. They're afraid of you. So the best thing to do is have it in a neutral place, a meeting room, a huddle room, something that's private. Outdoors, if you have an outdoor space that's private, is great, but in a private setting. The third bullet has to be employee-led. They have to start. They should come with things that they want to talk about. That takes a little work to get there. You kind of have to coach people and help them understand what it takes to bring to it. And you really do have to have the compelling scorecard for this part to work really well. But one-on-one start with, what do you have? What do you got? What do you want to talk about? What's important? If you get to the end of the one-on-one, you didn't cover your stuff, you can either schedule another meeting or you can cover it next time. But it has to start with them and what they have. This is their one-on-one, not our one-on-one for them. And oftentimes they'll start with things like what's important to them with their weekend or what they did, and that's that relationship building part. That's okay. Now, if it stays in that lane and all they're doing is talking about, the fun stuff, it's time to have a conversation and do feedback coaching on, we need to be work focused. It's okay to have those conversations, but I need you to come prepared. And there's more to it than that, but some of the resources I share will get into a lot more detail. Follow-up is the next big thing. At the end of the one-on-one, schedule yourself 5-10 minutes where you're not doing anything else except writing down the notes from that one-on-one, putting them someplace that you can go back to, because we have to follow up. We have to go back to them. If they say they're going to do something, did they do it? This is that opportunity for you to pat them on the back, say, way to go, or, hey, we need to redirect here. And we talked about this last time. And there's certain types of personalities, like the excuse artist or the blame shifter. We all know those folks. By writing down what they said, we can then challenge those problem personality types and help them focus their energy in a positive way, instead of being that, oh God, I got to have a one-on-one with that person today. I know what they're going to say. And if you've never had that scenario, you just wait. It will happen. The rest of us, I'm sure you're seeing the face in your head right now that you're just like, oh, I hated those one-on-ones. Doing that follow-up process helps a lot. And the last piece that has to be developed, focus on their development, helping them get better. If we hired right, and most of the time we did, people want to do a good job. They want to contribute. They want to go home feeling good. The purpose for a relationship building one-on-one is to help them feel like they're winning, help them win. In our personal lives, relationships are based on something very different than our professional lives. And sometimes there is an overlap, but in our professional lives, people want something. They want to go home feeling good. They want to be able to pay for the things that are important to them, house, food, loved ones, and so on. So that relationship's a little different. We need to help them feel like they're contributing, help them feel like they're safe, help them feel like they know what they're doing and they're on top of things, so work doesn't have to be their biggest worry. And bottom line, there's only one thing that we can offer most employees that they can't get someplace else. They can get pay anywhere else. They can get benefits anywhere else. They can do a job just like they're doing now, almost anywhere else. The one thing they can't get anywhere else is a relationship with us. And exit interviews are typically done very poorly. There are good ways of doing them, but most of them are bad. And we get answers like, oh, I got a job that pays more money. Well, that's not why they started looking. They started looking because that relationship with us failed. And that's the reason they took that job, because it pays more money, sure. That's not why they started looking. They started looking because this relationship building one-on-one didn't come to fruition. So before I move on to the next system, I see there's a lot of typing here. We have stuff we want to talk about on one-on-ones before I move on.
I have a question. I recently transitioned into public sector from healthcare, and we did a lot of like relationship building one-on-one type of things. So there really isn't a culture for that here, though. And I think one of the biggest barriers that I've noticed is time. What's appropriate timing in the call center setting? They get here at a certain time, they have set breaks, it can get busy. How can we I guess, implement a process for, these one-to-one relationship buildings when we're really low on time?
That's a great question. There's edge cases around the edges of the day where you're starting and you're ending, where there's going to be time. Typically, like your Monday through Friday shop, probably not Monday or Friday. That's typically high absenteeism days. It's also typically very busy days. There's typically room in there. Normally, you'll have a workforce management team where you're like, hey, I need to get 15, 20 minutes every other week with every single person. Where is the best place for me to do it? And they'll typically work with you. If they're unwilling to work with you, this isn't going to be popular for the managers and directors that are out there, but cheat and go steal the time. just pull them off the phones and do the work. You know, those other departments typically they can't spend the time looking at everything so closely that they see it. But when they see that by you doing this, you're improving your absenteeism, you're improving your attrition, you're improving your results, you're getting better speed of answer and so on, they're not going to challenge the fact that you need to do this. And the reality is, if a workforce management staff is doing well and the business is healthy enough, you should be staffing to the point where you're not running such high occupancy that you just don't have any room to breathe. And that's typically not what they want. It's typically because of other failures that have caused that. So, but in the end, work with those departments first, see if you get what you need. And sometimes it is better to beg forgiveness than ask permission. And if you do it right, the results will pay for themselves. But there is risk in both of those. So make the decision that's best for you, and don't say, Jeremy told me so, please. Does that help? I saw the thumbs up.
Yeah, and I will definitely say that, you know, that webinar you sent me to, Jeremy told me on the webinar to do it.
Well, if they're all going to say that, then you're probably in a safe space. But yeah, other thoughts or questions on the system of relationship building one-on-ones? The next one is compelling scorecards. Most contact centers don't have scorecards. They don't have anything at all. It's the supervisor has all the numbers in their computer in a spreadsheet somewhere, and we just tell the CSR or tell the agent what they're doing. And that's not going to work because they don't know. The flip side that we see that's also that's a little more common than the right way of doing it, but it's not the right way, is we give them everything. It's an eye chart with a ton of data, ton of numbers, and color coding. All this stuff is either red or green. And we feel great as leadership because, like, you can see everything, right? But they're not really, they're not there to digest that. We may have, in some cases, we have hired mathematicians to do the work because of the type of industry we're at. Very few contact centers are hiring math whizzes. It's not part of the skill set that we're trying to hire. Yet we provide all of this data that requires them to have a math degree to be able to digest and understand, and we don't want to do that. So we want to do a compelling scorecard. And for a scorecard to be compelling, it needs to be a few things. First, it has to be short and simple. Only using umbrella metrics. So try to work with the department that owns this, or if you're giving all these, digest it yourself to what are the 3, 4, maybe 5 things that are the most important, that if they're right, the other things are probably right. Good examples are some form of attendance or availability metric is typically important, because if you're here, you can do the work. Another one that's good is some sort of quality or VOC metric or a combination thereof. And then another one is some form of productivity. Are you doing enough work in the time we've asked you to do the work? And some folks use handle time, but handle time isn't always a great indicator, especially if the environment changes. But quantity of work done over time periods. So those are the most common ones. I've also seen like knowledge checks where we do regular trainings, like take time to learn or what have you throughout the month. And there are knowledge checks throughout, and there's an aggregate of their knowledge score to say, are you getting a good score? Do you know what we've taught you? Can you reproduce it or not? So these are examples of things that go on that umbrella score. What are bad metrics are like transfer rate isn't a good number. It's a good check engine light, but it's not a good number. More complicated metrics. The easiest way to know can a metric go here is if they can reproduce it on a desk calculator. I'm a little old when I say desk calculator, but on their phone calculator or whatnot, if they can reproduce the metric that way and do it themselves, it probably is okay to put on the scorecard. But keep it simple with only simple calculations. The next thing you have to have is you have to have way markers and history. A way marker is how are you doing to the goal? The expectation is 97%, you're at 98 or what have you. Or how are you doing compared to the average of the team? How are you doing compared to the top 30% or top people on the team? What does that look like? And how do they compare to that weight marker? Stay away from color coding. Color coding is very easily stigmatized. Just put, here's your result and here's the goal. And if you do it in a visually appealing way, like a speedometer or a heat map or something, that tends to improve palatability and improve their ability to absorb the information more than just a grid of charts. And then you need to have a history. Are they getting better or are they getting worse? Or last week was a bad week, but it's a blip and they're right back to where they were used to before, and we don't have to worry about last week. Line graphs tend to work best for that. You don't want so much data in the histogram that it looks like an EKG, but you don't want so little that it's not telling you anything. And by giving them that, and then you provide it at minimum weekly, preferably daily, but at minimum weekly, when they have this and they understand what's there and we've explained it to them and they've gotten their buy-in on it and it's super simple like this, they will come to those meetings prepared with what to do because they see where they are versus the way markers, and they see where they are versus their own history and say, hey, I'm really doing well with this and I'm on the right track, or I'm losing ground. Can we talk about this? I don't know what I need to do here. And when they come with that, they're listening. If you ever seen the World War II movie with Ben Affleck, Pearl Harbor, it talks about, the heart of, nothing beats harder than the heart of a volunteer. It's absolutely true. And if they come to you and say, Jeremy, I want to work on this, they're going to work on it much harder than you say, hey, we're talking about this again, in which case now you're fighting them. So this is a compelling scorecard. Thoughts on the system of compelling scorecards before we move on to the next one, or questions? Okay. I know this one seems like it can be a little more difficult to do. If you're given a ton of data, you can simply put this in Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets and simplify it. And then anything that doesn't go on the scorecard, think of it as a check engine light. As a supervisor, you want to see it. Monica, I'll send out some examples I've used when I send this deck over. I'll send it over to Jody, but yes, I will. But you want to do a check engine light is something that you would see on the manager scorecard, which has everything, and that's okay to have color coding on the manager scorecard. And if it's not red, you don't have to worry about it. If it's red, okay, then you need to go take a look and work on that. So that's compelling scorecard. And this works hand in hand with one-on-ones. You do these two things right, the rest of the stuff we're talking about is really great and really helpful. If you get these two things right as a supervisor, you really are in that place where you're in that advisory role and you're just advising them on how they can improve their stuff and they're owning it and they're working on it. Your life gets so much easier, and you get to the point where you're like, man, I can't imagine I used to work 70-hour weeks. I barely have enough work to do 30 hours, which really does happen, and you can get there with these two things. The next one isn't 100% in your control, but you have influence in it, and it's availability versus adherence. Most of us have adherence or compliance in our contact center, and for those of us that don't, it's, did you go to break when you're supposed to? Did you go to lunch when you're supposed to? Was your phone in the right code at the right time? And sometimes the right code at the right time means, like I said, break or lunch, but it could also mean, were you customer facing? Were you available for calls or chats or emails when you were supposed to? And like I said, go ahead and get your torches and your pitchforks ready when I say this. Adherence is evil, and we should get rid of it. And the reason why that is the case is, if we're in a busy environment like Tiana was talking about earlier, and we've got high occupancy where people are busy, they're put in a bad spot. They're on a call and break or lunch or whatever is coming up. Now they've got the choice of, I can shirk this call and make it short and get through it really quickly, risk a bad quality evaluation, risk bad VOC, but make it to break and lunch on time. Or I can do what's right by the caller, and now I miss my break or lunch, and I either have to choose, do I skip my break or lunch, or do I take it later and get a lower adherence score? Or do I play games on my phone where I avoid that call so I don't get a bad QA evaluation, and I go to break and lunch in time so I don't get bad adherence, but now I'm at risk for call avoidance and I'm going to get in trouble. Adherence puts agents in the place where it's a lose, lose, lose. It just doesn't work. And the purpose for adherence isn't a bad purpose. The purpose is, we need the right amount of people on the phones at the right time with the right skills. That is the right purpose, but there are better ways to do that. One of those ways is availability. Availability is, were you, we would get along very well. Sure, we got stories to share. The availability is, were you available to help a customer for the right amount of time in that day? And if you were available for the right amount of time in that day, and you follow some other conditions, you're in a good spot. And it's easy to think that if it's just the total quantity of time that they can game the system, there are ways to make it to where they can't game the system. So first, by doing this, you don't create a lose-lose scenario. Second, absolutely follow employment laws. Those of you that are in California, that is New York or Canada, very different employment laws on what you can and can't do, so you have less flexibility you've got there. But otherwise, use boundary conditions. So in my contact center, what we do is no break or lunch in the first or last hour of the day. That's it. And if there's a team meeting going on, no break or lunch during the team meeting. And other than that, we set a requirement on how many people need to be, based on the amount of people that are there today. What is the ratio of people that need to be available for customers? And as long as you're exceeding that threshold, you can take your break or lunch. Now, because availability, you can only take so much takes so much of that time. So it's not like they can take a ton of extra break or lunch because they have to hit that availability metric. They can only use so much shrink. But when you hit those barrier conditions, now they're making their own choices. Now they're flexing to the work. And what I found is people will more than often be on the phones when it's busy and take their breaks when it's not. When things get crazy and out of hand because we suddenly have an influence, there's an outage or whatever, people will make the right choices overall. I mean, I've got a couple of ladies who work for us who, because they work out in Virginia and they don't have the California laws, they actually combine their two breaks together. And they do, when everybody else is on break, they're on the phones. When everybody else is back from break, they go to lunch. And then when everybody else is at lunch, they're on the phones. And when everybody comes back, they take a second break, which is as long as their first lunch. It's a half hour. Then when everybody else starts going to break again, they're on the phones. And you know what? That works for them, and I love it. Because now I've got more people on the phones when I need them. Those hot spots around breaks and lunches aren't nearly as hot because they're willing to make that flexibility work. And the more flexibility you can give them, we were talking earlier on about an anti-fragile system. Adherence is fragile to the randomness of what people will do. Availability is anti-fragile to the randomness of what people do, because now that randomness is moving in the direction you want it to do. And when we rolled this out at Hunter Douglas, our in-center shrink got better, our average speed of answer got better, our service level got better, our attrition got better, and our employee engagement surveys all got better. There wasn't a loss there. Like everything that we expected was better. We had to have the right boundary conditions. Empower your teams to communicate. So if you've got a small team, they're going to have to talk to each other on who can go and who can't. If it's a large team, 20, 30, 40, 50 people, then they need to look at a dashboard that tells them how many people are or not available. And then, like I said, include flexibility. Now, I've been reading the chats. I've seen it move a lot, though. So thoughts and questions with all the stuff that was scrolling by that I didn't read.
If I may speak, that availability bit reminds me of some time that I spent in a 911 center. It assumes that the people who are there want to be there, and they want to be taking these calls to help the people that need the help. And there were even supervisors who would relieve people for their breaks so that we would have the minimum number of people. They would stop their stuff that they have deadlines on to jump on the phone just to let someone go to break. And that's one way to make people happy to see a supervisor walking towards them.
Oh, yeah. Timothy, that is a fantastic model. And you're absolutely right. When we get our hands dirty and we're part of the problem or part of the solution to what they're trying to solve, there's very few things better. That is a fantastic example and a great way to do availability so folks can get what they need. Great example. Other thoughts or questions people may have on availability?
I love the idea of availability over schedule adherence. I've seen it be successful in much larger centers, but when we're talking like 9 people on the phone that may not all be working at the same they're all working remote. I think you answered the question by basically having a dashboard where they can see, all right, my colleague has gone on a break, I need to postpone. But not using schedule adherence I've seen be really successful because some of the bad behaviors you talked about, they don't go into not ready a couple minutes before their scheduled break so that they're in adherence. So I like that. But availability, what field do you use in your ACD to identify a person's availability?
First, great examples, Monica. Thank you for sharing all that. I want to add to that, another way of doing it is not only the dashboard, but Slack channel, a Google Hangouts, an MS Teams channel for just those folks and the supervisor, just to talk about, hey, I'm going to break is another potential solution. Try to avoid scheduling it, like you said. So that's another potential option. Now, what are the metrics? Every ACD has their own vernacular. You'd think contact centers have been around for 30 some years. We wouldn't use different vernacular, but we do. So I'll just describe what behaviors are in there, and then your ACD may call it something different. But availability is anything that is customer facing. So being available, being on a call, being in wrap up, anything that is customer. If you're doing casework or chats in a status where you're receiving cases or receiving chats, all of those count in your numerator, and then your denominator is the amount of time we've scheduled them to be in those statuses. So you can have greater than 100%. So if a break goes short, your team meeting goes short, they can end up with a greater than 100%. Typically, depending on your handle time expectations, the goal is typically between 97 and 103 is a sweet spot. Greater than 103, there's probably something wrong. Less than 97, there's probably something wrong. So those are the behaviors that you'll see in those data points, and that's the division to get availability. Did I answer your question, Monica?
Perfect. Thank you so much. That is exactly what I needed.
You're welcome. Other thoughts or questions on this before I move on to VOC and QA? Next one's VOC and embedded QA. Typically in contact centers, VOC says I need to do this, QA says I need to do this, and the CSR is in the middle, and they have to decide, do I make the customer happy? Or it can be CES or whatever, any of those external survey-based results. Do I do what that does, or do I follow QA? And they feel torn. And that's not the right thing. If we build QA for VOC or CES or Net Promoter or whatever that is that we find is valuable for industry is part of QA, they no longer feel that. And the advantage is you now improve both. You improve both with very little effort. Yeah, VOC, voice of the customer, exactly. Thanks, Timothy. So first is QA score has to be mirrored in the VOC, or the QA score has to mirror the VOC categorization. So if you say promoter, neutral, and detractor, then a QA score has to be promoter, neutral, detractor. If you're using a percentage, then the QA score has to follow that percentage. Whatever that vernacular is that they get when they get VOC back, or we get VOC back, has to be identical to how we categorize that QA result. The second thing is that customer experience or effort or whatever it is that we're measuring has to be part of the evaluation process. Now, if we're in a highly regulated industry, like sometimes healthcare, legal, government work, if it's highly regulated, we tend to find that VOC ends up being can't be as large a part of the QA score. But the less regulated we are, the more likely it can be a larger part. And in my experience, you probably want it to be close to 50%. And when you're evaluating those calls, if you're doing the check marks, did they do this? Did they do that? Did they use the name the right amount of times? All those little things that we have to check the box on. But we're also evaluating what was that experience. What do we think that customer is going to give the VOC, and what is the evidence for that? And that is what gets put in that QA evaluation as well, and how we communicate it to the CSR or to the agent when we give them the answer. And when we do calibrations, so we should be doing QA calibrations, right, where we've got a QA team who QAs, we calibrate with them. The calibrations that they should be giving us are calls that have already been surveyed. We already have a score on it. So now we're listening to the call and we're doing all the stuff we normally calibrate on, right? Like, did they verify the account properly? Did they follow the security expectations? Did they give the right technical answer? But we're also writing down what that experience was like and what we think that customer or consumer felt like, whether it's effort or what have you. And then at the end, when we get the properly calibrated call, not only do we get, here's what the technical pieces are, but we also get, well, here's what the customer said about that call, and here's their comments on the call. So we can calibrate on that to convince them to do it the right way. And when we're doing this, that form should be built in such a way to encourage answering unasked questions or answering why will this customer call us back. typically having those being the questions for us helps us get to that point, right? Because whether we believe it or not, if a customer calls customer service, something has failed. Very rarely do we get those customers like, I was bored. How are you doing today? I just want to, is it your birthday yet? Like, those aren't the calls that we get. They're not calling us for entertainment value. They're calling us because they needed something and they couldn't find another way to do it on their own. They couldn't self-solve. So it's a failure. And our questions that we should ask ourselves is, did they walk away with unanswered questions, or why would they call again? And typically this tends to fight in the opposite way of AHT. But what you're doing when you do this, right, not only are they happier, you're reducing customer churn or improving VOC or improving lifetime value of the customer, whatever that metric is that your industry uses, not only improving that, but you're also reducing the chance that they're going to call us back. So now you're doing contact shift. And the main reason why folks had handle time, not only to plan out what staff we need, but handle time, they thought early on, like, the shorter our handle time, then the less it's going to cost us. But more importantly, the less time people call us, the less it's going to cost us. And that's more valuable. And when we do this right, we do see AHT go up. We also see a lot more contacts come out of the system. So we end up by far not as busy. That's VOC embedded QA. Thoughts or questions on this before I move on?
I got one, Jeremy. I was just going to say, I was typing it in, but I love what you just said there. It's so important. We want our customers to feel comfortable calling us back if they have a problem in the future. And since we're not sales oriented, in government, it's different than those sales oriented call centers. But, yeah, we want them to like us and feel like if I call this place, they're going to help me with my solid waste issue, with this road issue. But we don't want them to have to call us back about the same thing over and over again. So it's a really interesting balance.
Right on the nose, Shannon. You nailed it. And if you can help solve those things, and part of a good, I don't have it here, but part of a good VOC embedded QA process is identifying what are the external systemic issues that are causing repeat calls and removing those. So if there's, I've never worked with, clearly in your industry, so I'm going to give an example that has nothing to do with it. But if there's, like, we're Hunter Douglas, we sell amazing shades. If there's a specific shade that's getting a lot of calls, we need to go to the manufacturing and say, hey, the silhouettes are getting a lot of calls about this. We need to find out what's going on and get in front of it before we ship any more silhouettes.
Yeah. Right now we've got an issue going on where we're getting tons of calls about the need for a traffic light as opposed to just a stop sign. So it's things like that. But as we've tracked the cases and the calls over time, it's not the same people calling back. I mean, that's kind of that process takes a while, but because so many people called about it, we had the justification along with traffic counts to, yes, it needs a light. But now, I mean, we just are having to continually explain to other people in the area. So now we've shifted to, we need to be doing some public, put stuff on social media, public outreach to that community, letting them know it's in the works, it's going to happen, this is the timeline.
That's perfect. And you can even, if you're working with your technologist for the product owner for your CCAS suite, you can identify, depending on how you have your CCAS suite up, that's probably what they're calling about, and try to keep that call from coming and say, hey, we have a meeting coming up on this thing, join the meeting at this time. If you have any questions beyond that, please hang on the line. And it'll typically keep them from going through, because that's all they want to know. Hey, you're really going to do something. Yes, I want to be at that meeting. I'm going to give you a life example before we go to Q&A. I'm a father of 3 and a grandfather of 1, and I have good kids. Overall, I've got good kids. I can't tell you how many times when we're leaving a McDonald's play place, people ask us, how do we get our kids to be ready to go right away and be happy to be leaving instead of playing with their friends? And without getting too deep into parenting, we got 1 part luck, 1 part good coaching, 2 parts luck. We just ended up with pretty good kids, right? But when we're going someplace, they were not my children. They were demons or whatever. Like, sometimes I wanted to yank them out of the car and do a roadside exorcism. What have you done with my child? They were just not the same kid. And eventually my wife's like, hey, I want to get a minivan. And I'm like, yeah, we're not going to be doing that. and we test drove a whole bunch of SUVs. And on those test drives, my kids weren't any different. And then one day on our way home, there was a minivan she liked on the way home. Like I said, it's on the way home. I can't not go, right? So we went, and it had 2 captain's chairs in the middle and a bench in the back. And that entire test drive, kids were my kids again. No amount of sitting on their hands, putting their hand on their mouth, threatening to turn the car around, any of those things that people told me to do worked. Problem was, they were at the age where they needed to have personal space, and the problem that needed to be changed was the system. There was nothing I could do other than change the system. And as soon as I changed that system, my kids were my kids again. They were good kids, and I didn't feel like, I needed to yank them out of the car by their shirt. So with that, I know we've done a lot of questions and answers. We're going to do some more. We will send this deck out. I will also include a couple of examples of compelling scorecards. Take a screenshot of this if you'd like. I think the first 2 bullets on here, beyond command and control and the effective manager, I think everybody should read these. These are essentially, they taught me so much. I'm a turtle on a pole. I didn't get there by myself. Somebody helped me get up there. And those books, I think every supervisor should read. They're fantastic books. They're both on Audible if you prefer that method versus a paper or an ebook. Human Sigma, if you're in charge of customer service or the CX experience, read Human Sigma. It's kind of long, but it'll help you fix the things that you're probably doing wrong in your customer experience. If the word textbook gets you excited, Contact Center Management on Fast Forward. Or if you work in WFM, if you're a product manager, you want that. And then the last one that is a big recommend, if you work with international teams, you're going to want to read the culture map. It's going to save your life. I made so many cultural mistakes in my youth that had this book been around, it would have saved me. And then if you love the idea of systems theory and everything I'm talking about, and you just can't wait to get more, there's a whole bunch more books for you. So, questions? Will I be at the conference in Charleston? I don't know that I've not been invited. So if I do get invited, I'll be there.
Well, let me officially change that. You want to go?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yep, absolutely, Julie.
Working with you.
We are loving this. Good information.
I'm glad. I see a lot of good things in here. As I've gone down this path, I've learned if we do it this way and we just change the system, it allows people to keep their dignity and self-respect intact while getting the results that we want. It works almost every time. Sometimes you're gonna have to tweak these systems for your environment. You can't just take what I've given you here and copy and paste and expect it to work. You have to play with it because people are different everywhere, but these systems, so far I've worked throughout my entire career once I learned that they existed and was able to do it. So, yeah, I don't have
I
anything.
know we're out of time, so I might reach out to you offline, but do you do not just exit interviews, but stay interviews?
I do. Stay interviews are a fantastic way of doing it. Sometimes they're level 2 interviews. They are a great system to help you inform what's there. Good ways to do stay interviews are not to do a stay interview with them about them, but to do that with them about a hypothetical person or other people on the team, because it's like, oh no, I'm never gonna quit, I'm loyal. But that Shannon person, she probably isn't gonna, and now they're gonna start telling you things that are about themselves, even though they're projecting. It tends to work with stay interviews. And those are far better than exit interviews. And if you don't do stay interviews and you want to do exit interviews, a good way of doing it is, when did you start looking? Is a great question. Not why are you leaving? When did you start looking? And then what was going on when you started looking? Or wait until they've been gone for a couple of weeks or a month, and then say, hey, do you have time for a quick conversation, a quick coffee? And then ask them those types of questions there, where there's no longer any room for them to be worried about, their addiction to, food, clothing, and shelter that you control, and they can tell you more honestly what they're seeing. And again, not why did you leave? I left for more money. Of course, I would leave for more money too. But people don't tend to walk around saying, hey, do you want more money? Come on over, right? Like, they were looking for a reason. And the question is, why are you looking to leave? What was going on when you started looking? Go. Sounds like you want to say more, Shannon.
This is just a whole other webinar. We'll talk. Thank you.
Here's what not to do. Let me ask you. Timothy, we're going to be great friends. This is hilarious. You're absolutely right.
That is great.
It's
Jody,
such a small community because we just had this come up. Even when you're doing an exit interview, unless you're totally remote and, you know, working at a global level, you're still not going, even if you know, I'm never going to want to come back to work for the Baldwin County Commission again. Everybody is so interconnected that you're still not going to be honest.
yeah. And to be fair, the advice I give people when they're saying, what should I say during an interview? I love my boss. I love my work. I'm happy to come back later because you don't want to burn that bridge.
Yep. Yep.
Right? You don't want to burn the bridge. It's not smart to tell them the truth. Hey, you suck and you're a terrible person. I never want to work for you again. Yeah, don't say that in an exit interview. It's not going to go well.
Yeah, but we need to, that needs to somehow be identified. You know, it should be obvious because all these people are exiting.
It is. And it can be bad leadership, but people tend to leave their boss. And it's not because you're a bad person or a bad boss. It's because we're asking them to swim against the grain is typically the cause, right? And it can be that we're underpaid to the market. You don't control that, right? So there are factors that have nothing to do with you. So we can't say it's always, as a supervisor, it's always our fault they leave, because that is absolutely not the case. But if we do have an attrition issue that is not normal for our environment, then yes, it's typically something where, what is that analogy? If you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it's going to feel stupid, something along those lines, right? Like when we have a system that's set up to get this result and we're yelling at people to get this result, they're going to feel like that fish and they're going to leave.
Yeah.
Jody, before we keep going, back to you.
Let me unmute myself here for a moment. That was fantastic. And there was all kinds of great thumbs up and thank yous and voice of the customers and what we do. And so this will be sent out. I can also send out the chat too, so everybody has that information as well as, oh, Jody typed something about this and I'd really like to read that again. So I'll make sure that I have the chat out for you guys too. Jeremy, thank you. That was fantastic. A lot of great information. And we so appreciate you and Julie for helping get this set up for us today and being sponsors for our upcoming conference in October. And if you're on the line and you're unfamiliar with that, please go to our website, agccp.com, or is it .gov? I've got it up here somewhere.
.org and
.org.
will get you there, but agccp.org.
.org. Sorry about that, you guys. gov.org.com, whatever it takes, right? Put in AGCCP, check it out, see what's going to happen. We've got some great things going on and are so excited to see everyone again. We will continue to have webinars. And we appreciate everyone. Thank you, Shannon. She put it in the chat for you guys, so you can just pop on over there. Thanks again for everything. And we appreciate you, Jeremy and Julie, for getting this out to us today. And if registration is still open, but there's not very many spots left, Shannon said. So get in there if you can. So I'll go ahead and stop record and we will call it a day, and appreciate all of you so much for being here. We appreciate you for sure.
Pleasure to meet all of you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.